was giving a talk last winter at an insight meditation center back east, and the topic of insight came up. And someone in the group said, you know, what our teachers teach us about insight is it's all about letting go, letting go, letting go. And he said, that may be okay for Dharma teachers because they live a very easy life. But for those of us in the real world, it doesn't work. How are you going to survive if you just let go of everything? And I thought to myself, it's come to this. Dharma teachers have an easy life. But I could sympathize with the question because that's a lot of what you hear about what insight is. It's all about the reflections that allow you to let go of whatever's burdening the mind, and it's all about letting go. The Buddha himself, though, didn't teach in that way. He basically said there are two kinds of causes of suffering, and they have to be treated in different ways. There's one kind where you simply look at the cause of suffering and it kind of withers away. And there's the other when, you can put it in easy terms, is that you look at it and it stares right back at you. It's not going to go away unless, as the Buddha said, you exert a fabrication against it. So tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about what he means by exerting a fabrication and why it's necessary in order to overcome a lot of the causes of suffering in the mind. Excuse me, I swallowed something the wrong way this evening and it's still down there in my lungs. When you look at that theory that all you need to do is let go of things, it's based on a particular attitude about the mind, or an understanding about how the mind works. In fact, the idea that this would take care of everything is based on the idea that, to begin with, your mind is passive, and it gets disturbed by sensory input coming in. And because it has the wrong map in its mind about what reality is like, it will react. And then its reactivity is what causes suffering. Now all you have to do is give the mind the right map, realizing that there is no permanent self and the things that come to disturb the mind are not permanent. Once you see that for yourself through the practice of just watching things arise and pass away without trying to react, without trying to judge them, you'll come to the conclusion, yes, this new map is right, that there is no self, there is no permanent self, things come and go. And you will just naturally let go. That kind of attitude is defeatist. It basically says that the best you're going to get is an undisturbed mind as it's always been in the past. There's nothing better than this. And that simply seeing the fact that things are processes is enough to let you let go of them, and not try to place any hopes that processes, things that arise and pass away, are going to give any real happiness. The Buddha was not a defeatist, and that's certainly not the picture of the mind that he draws in his analysis of why we suffer. He actually says that we fabricate our experience. If you look at dependent co-arising and you don't get overwhelmed by the details, one of the things you'll notice is that there's a lot of activity that comes prior to receiving input, sensory input into the mind. And particularly right after the factor of ignorance is what he calls fabrication. This is what we're going to be talking about. And there are three kinds of fabrication. There's bodily fabrication, which is the way you breathe. There's verbal fabrication, there's the way you basically talk to yourself. And his analysis of this is interesting. He says it's directed thought and evaluation. You direct your thoughts to a particular topic and then you comment to yourself about it. There are actually some languages, Thai is one of them, Chinese is another one, where the basic sentence structure is topic comment. It's not just subject, verb, object. You have a topic and then you comment on the topic. And that's basically directed thought. You choose a topic, then you comment on it. And then the third form of fabrication is mental fabrication, which is perceptions and feelings. Feelings here are feeling tones, feelings of pleasure, pain, neither pleasure nor pain. And the perceptions are the labels that the mind places on things. And these either can be visual images or they can be individual words. And the mind will flash these things at you in kind of a subliminal way. Years back, I was visiting a friend back east, and he was watching that horrible show, 24 Hours. And he wanted to see how a monk would react to 24 hours. Well, this monk looked at it for a minute and went to the other side of the room. But then, they had an advertisement on for Fox News. And because this monk had not been watching TV for a long time, he actually saw the subliminal messages on the screen. They flash these quick things as, be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. And I asked my friend, I said, this Fox News is getting awfully blatant these days, isn't it? He said, oh yeah, that's Fox News, that's always the way they've been. I said, no, did you see those messages? He hadn't. But they're there. And the mind sends these little messages to you at the same time. It will flash a picture of something, a word or a picture, and that will influence how you're experiencing things. These processes all come prior to sensory input. Like the mind, if the mind does these processes under ignorance, you're going to prime yourself for suffering, no matter what comes up. Good things come up, you're going to suffer about them. Bad things come up, you're going to suffer about them, because the mind is doing these processes in ignorance. On top of that, the things that we tend to cling to, the Buddha calls the aggregates. It's good to look into those, because he says the aggregates don't just come at you ready-made. You also play a role in processing them, and again, fabricating them as well. And you fabricate them for a purpose. In other words, you're looking for the pleasure that they have to provide. He says we fabricate formness for the sake of having a form. We fabricate feelingness, perceptionness. It's a peculiar passage in the Pali. But what he's basically saying is that we have these potentials, and they're coming in from our past karma, for particular experiences of form, feeling, perceptions, thought constructs, and consciousness. And we go out and we shape them because we want these things as tools that we can use. You sometimes wonder, when the Buddha analyzed things into the 5 aggregates, why did he choose those particular 5 activities of the mind? And they are activities. He defines them in terms of verbs. They're not things. When you think of the term aggregate, you tend to think of piles of gravel. But aggregate, the term in Pali, khandha, simply means heaps of things. But they're not really things, they're activities. And they're activities that we engage in basically for the sake of feeding. The Buddha said this is one of the things that defines us as beings. As a being, you are trying to feed on pleasure. In fact, you create your sense of who you are around your ideas about what kind of pleasures you're going to look for. And then once you have that sense of who you are, that has to be fed as well. It's kind of like a vicious cycle. To get what you want, you have to become a being. And then to stay on as a being, you have to continue feeding. And so we feed off these aggregates. And the aggregates are basically the processes that are involved in feeding. You look at an easy example about physical feeding. Of course, when we're talking about feeding in general, it's not just physical feeding, there's mental feeding as well. You feed off emotions, you feed off pleasure, you feed off relationships, all kinds of things. But just think for a minute about physical feeding. First there's form, which in this case is your body, and also there's the form of the food out there. Secondly, there's feeling. You've got the feeling of hunger that you want to assuage, and then there's the feeling of pleasure that you hope to get out of feeding on whatever it is. There's perception, in which you basically try to identify what's edible. And this is how little children basically navigate their way across the floor when they begin to crawl. They come across something, and where does it go? Right in their mouth, to see if it's edible or not. And after a while you begin to have this perception. This is food, that's not food. And then the mind basically develops some more sophisticated perceptions of what's food and not food, until you're French. Then you're really sophisticated. And then we've had some French people visiting us at the monastery. And seeing the comments that they made about each other's food was pretty amazing. The food was fantastic, but not good enough. No. At any rate, that's perception. Fabrication is, and at the same time, you're not only trying to identify the food out there, you're also trying to identify your hunger. What are you hungering for? You learn how to identify that as well. Are you hungry for something salty? Are you hungry for something sweet? Whatever. You've learned how to perceive these things. Then there's fabrication, where you actually engage in the activities of taking what you found and making it edible. You get a raw potato, and there are certain things you have to do to a raw potato before you can eat it. You get a piece of meat, there's certain things you have to do to the meat before you can eat it. Finding it and then fixing it. And then finally there's consciousness, which is the awareness of all these things. So these are the activities by which we feed on our experience. And this is one of the reasons why we're so attached to them, is because we need these tools in order to feed off things. And we cling to them, and the word clinging in Pali, upadana, also means, that's another word to feed. So there's a double layer of feeding. The processes by which we get our food are things that we also cling to. We identify ourselves around this. We're the type of people who feed in a particular way. You look at personal ads, and what kind of food do you like? That's one of the things that goes out there. This is how I like to feed off my experience. I like to feed off walks in the evening and sitting by the fire and that kind of thing. This is how the mind feeds off of activities. We try to create experiences for ourselves that we enjoy feeding on. And this is how we suffer. And the mind is not simply passively waiting for things to come its way. It's out there looking. And this is the important part of the Buddha's analysis of why we suffer, is because we're out looking for things to feed on. And so it's not the case that we're just simply sitting there passively and something comes in and makes contact. We're out there looking for trouble. I mean, this is why we have the internet. You turn it on, It's not that it turns itself on and comes at you, Although maybe someday they'll make it that way. I hope not, though. But basically, you have to turn it on. I mean, this is why we have hate radio. People want to get worked up, and so they turn it on. And that's the mind is constantly going out there looking for things. And so telling a mind like this that it simply has to accept the fact that there is no happiness to be found through any of these activities, and you just have to simply let go of the idea that you're going to find any pleasure out there. It's like saying, okay, because food is impermanent, you will stop eating. We all know that food is impermanent, but we continue eating anyhow, because we have this need to keep going for this. And so what the Buddha is going to attack is that need to continue feeding, which is why we have to do more than just note things as they come and they go and be okay with their coming and going. We have to look back in it. Why is it that the mind needs to feed? What is it lacking? Can we provide it with something that will not need to feed? In other words, is there a pleasure out there? Is there happiness out there that can be experienced without having to have this activity of going out and feeding? Because the feeding itself is the suffering, the clinging, the continuing activity. That we have to keep producing this, because look, not only is your experience, it's for the sake of something. It's not that just you're simply passively getting it. You're out there looking for the sake of something. And you are actually going out and engaging in effort so that you can have their experience. We tend to think of things coming at us, but we're also going out to get them. You can see this clearly in cases of people who've been blind from birth, and they figured out that there are certain operations they can do that actually give them their sight. But most of these people, once they get their sight, have not developed the parts of the brain that can actually interpret what's coming in. We've learned how to, those of us who have eyes that learn how to see, we know how to interpret what we're seeing right now in terms of three-dimensional space and all the other things that we need in order to make sense of all this stuff that's coming to bombard us. Well, that activity is going out all the time. And so there's an effort there. In fact, the Buddha says we're conscious of, or this effort actually comes prior to the input coming in, which means that this experience by which we're trying to feed is an effortful thing. That's why there's stress there all the time. And even though there are these potentials coming in from our past karma, we are actually more aware of our present karma, which is going out to try to shape them even before they come in. It's an interesting idea, that it's your present karma is prior to your experience of past karma. And so what the Buddha is trying to get us to do is to do this process with knowledge, with awareness, which is why we have to, quote-unquote, exert a fabrication against certain defilements. And what we do then is we have to change the way we breathe around, say, anger, the way we think to ourselves about the anger, whether we talk to ourselves about the issue that has us angry, and we have to learn how to see how we perceive these things and change our perceptions. This is one of the reasons why with physical or bodily fabrication, we work with the breath as our main topic, because we want to sensitize ourselves to the breath energy in the body as we go through the day, so that we can see to what extent does the way I'm breathing create an irritation, to what extent does it create a sense of not being comfortable in the present moment, so I can't handle things properly. Let's go back and learn how to do the breathing process with knowledge, with awareness, so that when anger comes up, you learn how to breathe through the anger as your first line of defense. Whatever tension is coming up in the body, you learn how to breathe through it. This is one of the basic skills you need to develop as a meditator. Secondly, in terms of directed thought and evaluation, you have to look at yourself. How are you talking to yourself about the object? And again, this is why we do directed thought and evaluation. You've probably heard this in another context. These are the factors of the first jhana, the first state of right concentration. As you're talking to yourself about the breath and evaluating the breath and learning how to adjust the breath, you're getting more and more sensitive to how you are discussing things here in the present moment. So that when you start discussing other things, you're like, why did my stupid neighbor park his car in front of my driveway? Okay, you can look. Okay, I've got to talk to myself in a way that is not going to get worked out. I've got to learn how to, reformulate the issue. So you learn how to do that with knowledge as well. And then the same with perceptions and feelings. So when we're working with the breath, we're trying to use a perception of the breath that allows us to stay there, and it gives rise to feelings of comfort. Then we can learn how to take that knowledge and use it in the course of the day. When something comes up, okay, what's the underlying perception that has you irritated about a particular person, even though the person has done very few things? A lot of this is cultural. When I was in Thailand, I'd be sitting in a room talking to people, and someone would come in and just make a few comments and then leave. And I looked around, and everybody else in the room was upset. And this is when I was just learning Thai, and I hadn't realized, okay, what that person had done was he had not put the polite markers at the end of his sentences. The little ha, wa, whatever. If it was wa, you're ready for a fight. It was ha, it's okay. That's it. The difference between ha and wa can be the difference between a peaceful family and an unpeaceful family. And we have the same sort of thing in English, with our tone of voice. Little things that can drive people up the wall. You have to ask yourself, to what extent do I want my perception of these things to control my behavior? If you want to drive a non-native speaker crazy, try this sentence. I didn't say you were stupid. 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 It's those little things that can drive you up the wall. And so you've got to learn how to be very sensitive to that. And we do this, going through the meditation. This is why concentration is such an important part of the practice. It's not simply getting your mind still so that you can, understand the truths of the Buddha's teachings. You want to get hands-on practice with these processes of fabrication. Learn how to do them well. Because ordinarily, as we're feeding off of the aggregates, it's like feeding chickens. We nourish these things. We're trying to create these aggregates because we're going to get some pleasure out of them. So it's like feeding the chickens so we can get the eggs. But then we tend to be not very discerning about what we're getting out of the chicken. So that whatever the chicken produces, we eat it. Not only the eggs, but also the chicken shit. It just goes right in. And then we don't realize that what we're raising is the chickens from hell. Because at night they come and they peck out our eyes. And we haven't made the connection. So we've got to learn how to see the connection. These are the things that I'm feeding, and this is the suffering that's coming back from the process that I'm trying to feed these things. I think I'm going to feed something off of them, or get some food out of them. But they're also coming to attack me. The Buddha says this with the aggregates. We feed the aggregates, but they come back and they chew on us. We're getting chewed up by form. We're getting chewed up by feelings, perceptions, fabrication, consciousness, if we don't do them with knowledge. If we're doing them with ignorance, they're going to be the cause of suffering. If we do it with knowledge, they actually become part of the path. So when you're formulating a fabrication, say you're dealing with anger. One, check in, how are you breathing right now? Secondly, okay, what are you telling yourself about the issue? And then thirdly, what are the perceptions you have around this? when you're passing judgment on other people. And the Buddha didn't say passing judgment is bad. And the whole path is basically about judging which is a better form of happiness, which is a less worthwhile form of happiness. But when you're judging other people, what image do you have of yourself in relationship to them? Oftentimes you're the judge sitting up here on the bench and they're way down there. And you can pass judgment on them as ever you like, and it doesn't really affect you, you think. But the Buddha gives another image. He says it's like you're walking across the desert. You're hot, trembling with thirst. You come across a little pool of water in a cow's footprint. Now you realize if you try to scoop up the water in the footprint, you're going to get it muddy. So you have to get down on all fours and slurp it up. Now it's not a pretty picture, and you would not like having someone come and take a photograph of you while you're doing this, but in a situation like that, it's necessary. He said in the same way, when you're dealing with someone who's been misbehaving in either their bodily behavior or their verbal behavior, you've got to look for their good qualities. Because otherwise, you are going to be hot, trembling, and thirsty. You're going to lack the water you need. And if you're living with a world where there's nothing but human beings that are horrible people, you're not going to be treating them well. You need the water of their goodness. So you're not the judge sitting up here. You're that person who needs the water of the goodness of other people. Otherwise, you're like that cartoon that was in the New Yorker. 2 female poodles are sitting in a bar. They're female because they have makeup, And they're both looking kind of disgusted with the world. And one of them is saying, they're all sons of bitches. Well, if everybody is a son of a bitch, what are you? You've got to look at you need other people's goodness. You have to hold that perception in mind. In fact, this is a lot of what the Buddhist teachings are. You notice when you read the Pali Canon that the most entertaining parts are the analogies. Those are the parts that stick in the mind. And that's with a purpose. The Buddha is giving you new images, new perceptions to hold in mind. There's the famous one about the bandits have pinned you down, pinned your arms and legs down, and they're cutting off your limbs with a 2-handled saw. And the Buddha says, even in that case, you would have to have goodwill for them. You start with goodwill for them, and then you spread the goodwill for the entire universe. If you don't have goodwill for them, he said, you are not following my teaching. And then he asks the monks, okay, when someone comes and says nasty words to you, if you hold this image in mind, are their words more than you can bear? No. So learn how to change your perceptions around things. When we think about people doing things or saying things that are horrible, one of the perceptions the Buddha has is that this is normal for the human race. He said there are these kinds of speech in the human world. There's true speech and there's false speech. There's kind speech, there's unkind speech. There's speech that's well-meaning, there's speech that's not well-meaning. And so what you're being exposed to right now, is it anything new? This has been in the world all along. It's not outrageous that you are being treated this way. And if you can hold that image in mind, you are not going to react in unskillful ways, and you'll be able to actually deal more skillfully with the situation. This doesn't mean you have to just sit there and take it, but it means don't get worked up. Be calm. And then as my grandfather taught my brother, my mother was a novelist, and her characters in the novels had strange names, and so she named us. I actually had the most normal name in the family. My older brother was Galen, my younger brother was Giles. And we're living on a farm. And you go to grade school and in a farming community. If your name is Galen, your name is Giles, you're going to have to defend yourself. And my grandfather didn't think much of my mother's names. And so when Galen went to school, he took him outside and he said, okay, Galen, people are going to make fun of your name at the school. You're going to have to learn how to fight. So my grandfather had been an amateur boxer when he was young, so he taught my brother how to box a little bit. And so he was boxing along. And as my grandfather got more and more aggressive, and my brother just lost it and started flailing, and my grandfather put his hand on his head and says, okay, stop. Don't ever lose it. And if someone comes and does something that you don't like, grow cold and then knock them out. So it's much more effective if you're dealing with other people if you don't get worked up. You can knock them out. But you do it skillfully. So it's not that you just take things, but you have to learn how not to react. You have to hold the perceptions in mind, and you have to hold the mental dialogue that you have in your mind in a way, so that you can actually deal more effectively, so that you can know how to do this fabricating process with skill rather than with out of ignorance. And so this is one of the reasons why the Buddha said, with a lot of your defilements, you have to exert a fabrication. But you do it knowingly. Because it's only through fabricating that you can actually get to the unfabricated. It's not that nirvana is going to come and give us nirvana. And this is why we said the Buddha was not a defeatist when it comes to the possibility of happiness. He said it is possible to use this process of fabrication to take you to the threshold of the unfabricated. And one of his names for the Eightfold Path was unexcelled victory in battle. He was not just saying, I just accept the way things are and give up on the idea of happiness. He says, you have to learn how to use this process of fabrication, which you've been doing unskillfully, out of ignorance. Give it some knowledge. Do it with knowledge. And then it can take you to the unfabricated, which is the happiness which does not require feeding. And it's when you get there, okay, that's how you stop getting hungry. You don't deny yourself food. You don't say, well, I'm not going to eat food anymore because, gosh, my stomach is impermanent and food is impermanent. That's not going to work. You're trying to stop feeding that way, and part of your mind is going to go out sneaking for midnight snacks. You want to say, okay, I need to feed knowledgeably, and I need to feed in a way, as the Buddha said, the Eightfold Path is a path of fabrication. You learn how to fabricate your way to the threshold where the mind touches the unfabricated, and then you don't need to feed anymore. So this is why the attitude of I'll just take whatever comes up and be non-judgmental and be non-reactive does not work. It works in a few situations, but overall it's not going to work. And the Buddha is actually telling you, perfect your powers of judgment. You have to try to figure out what is a worthwhile pursuit of happiness and what is not a worthwhile pursuit of happiness. Or when you have two kinds of happiness presented to you, which is the better? You want to go for long term. You want to go for harmless. We have to be able to judge these things. The insight is a value judgment. And so you're perfecting your powers of judgment as you fabricate. If you look at this in terms of looking for food and fixing food, you learn to tell whether your food is really edible, really good for you. So you have to use your powers of judgment. You have to have preferences. It's simply learning how to do it with more knowledge, with more awareness. That's how it works. So those are the thoughts I had tonight to get you ready for this weekend. Are there any questions? Yes?
You mentioned earlier CNN.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, is it ever appropriate for lay practitioners to follow politics or maybe dabble in politics?
You have to look at how it's having an impact in your mind. And if you can view it as a kind of generosity, that you're going to give some time to help a particular cause, that can be your form of generosity. But it's always with generosity that the Buddha has a few comments surrounding what's wise generosity. One is, no one else can tell you what you should do or shouldn't do or give. That's basically. When the king one time came to the Buddha and said, where should a gift be given? And the Buddha says, wherever you feel inspired. So there's no should that anybody's going to impose on you. But you have to look, is this gift harming me? Is it harming other people? And way of seeing that if it's going to harm you is, what's happening to your meditation practice? To what point are you getting too burned out, or you're getting too involved? Secondly, what kind of people you're getting involved with? You have to look carefully at the people that you are banding together with, and what kind of attitudes they have, and what kind of values they have. Are they really in line with the Dhamma? So you have to judge the case for yourself. Yes.
I'm so excited to see you. Two questions for you. One thing I struggle with for quite some time now is, and it kind of goes back along the lines of feeling like I'm being judgy, but is keep their mind away from the negative. And we all know we get negative sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
We all get depressed sometimes, but I find myself sort of, I really kind of push those away that don't always seem to choose a high road or
Mm-hmm.
a positive attitude and always trying their best. Kind of just like to know your thoughts on that. And also, on the harmlessness, I'd like to hear your opinions on eating vegetarian, not eating vegetarian, and also extermination of vermin in one's house. I struggle with that one.
Okay. Okay. First question is, I mean, the Buddha actually lists, finding admirable friends as one of the most basic, stages of the practice, because that will have an influence on what you get to hear and what values you're picking up and what, how you are engaging in mental fabrication and verbal fabrication. You pick up examples from how other people do this. Now you can't surround yourself totally with good people all the time, but the people that you look for your kind of emotional support, the people that you look for, that you go to them for advice, be very picky about that. Be very, try to judge as wisely as you can. Are these people good for me? As for harmlessness, I mean, the Buddha, it's interesting, the Buddha's topic, his discussion of the way you harm other people is not so much by breaking the precepts. He says you harm yourself by breaking the precepts. You harm others by getting them to break the precepts. You treat them as agents, and that they're responsible for their happiness. And if you try to move in on them and get them to do things that are unskillful, that's going to be for their long-term suffering. That's the worst harm you can do. In terms of vegetarianism, this is really an individual matter. I mean, the precepts don't require it. It basically comes down to, the precept is either you do it yourself or you tell somebody else to do it. Now, as far as your indirect impact on other beings, I mean, there's no way that's going to end. But you can decide for yourself, you want to say, I want to take it a step further. But again, you have to look at your own personal health. I know a lot of people who try vegan diets and it's just not working. So you have to look at that as well. As far as vermin in your house, what kind of vermin are we talking about? Ant? The ants that never go away. Your ants?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Ants are easy. They don't like powder, like talcum powder, or they don't like cinnamon. They also don't like cayenne pepper. So find their routes and block them. And if you have to figure out, we're living in a world where other beings want to live too. And you have to say, okay, this is my space. Please don't invade my space. You can have your space, and part of their space may be the walls of your house. But you say, as long as you don't come crawling across me at night, we're going to learn how to live together. It's good. I mean, try to figure out a little bit of ant psychology. It makes you more sensitive to the needs of the beings in the world. Yes?
I don't really understand what you mean by fabrication. I'm listening, and I'm listening to your examples, but I really don't understand.
Okay, the Pali word is sankhara, which is sometimes called volitional formations. It's the intentional element in how you engage in the world and the way in which you shape your experience. And so what you've got is, there are potentials in your experience that kind of come in from your past karma, and you have these skills in learning how to create an experience out of them that you can understand. Things come in and you have to put a perception on them to identify what is that. And then you talk to yourself, well, now that I know what that is, how do I feel? All of this is called fabrication. And the way the Buddha talks about the breath as bodily fabrication is because there is an intentional element in the way you breathe. You decide when to breathe in, when to breathe out. A lot of this has gone on to automatic pilot. But there are times when you can be aware of. I can choose to shorten my breath. I can choose to lengthen my breath. It's one of the few bodily processes over which you can exert some conscious control. And you want to be a little bit more conscious about how you breathe, because otherwise an emotion comes in and it takes over the breath. And then you find yourself irritated and unable to deal with the situation. So you want to look at what is your intentional element in the present moment. That's what fabrication would be.
So the way you're talking, fabrications are always positive, but yet when you bring up...
They're not always positive.
Oh, okay, all right, that's right.
It can be negative too.
All right.
Because we're, as I said, these are processes we often do in ignorance. And I was talking about fabrication in terms of meditation as a positive way of doing this, but you can fabricate anger, you can fabricate greed, you can fabricate all kinds of stuff. Yes?
So I have a question about fabrication. So I'm a therapist, psychotherapist, and most of my clients think they understand this process, they understand that they're a participant in the world, that they interpret the world, they fabricate,
Mm-hmm.
and so they understand that they can learn to reinterpret the world, they can be happier, they can change their life. But there are certain types of people with very severe illnesses like schizophrenia or personality disorder, that see the world purely in black and white terms, and they're either like pure victims or pure controllers, and they don't see how they don't understand that they're participating in the world. Like they see the world in a very fixed way,
Mm-hmm.
and so even the notion of changing your thinking or changing your feeling is a totally alien notion, because the world is the way it is,
Mhm.
and that's just not even on the radar. So do you have any idea?
I mean, this is really an individual thing. Because these people usually will have some little part of their lives which is not totally black and white. And you have to find that. And start and say, well, here's an area where you can actually see this, that you can change the way you think. And then try to work from that. But that requires that you know the person really well. Yes?
I've been studying a lot of anatomy for school, and today when I was meditating, I always had a problem bringing the breath energy to the back, and I was thinking lots of the muscles back there, and I found that helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like that's also kind of a slippery slope, because if you were to go through the whole body and just find minute areas and try and deal with those areas, felt like based on anatomy, that would kind of become overly complex. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts.
If it helps you relate, then it's perfectly fine.
Do you need to focus on like the internal part of the abdomen when you're bringing the breath energy there, or do you just generally focus on the feelings?
I generally focus on the feelings. I mean, because I've seen anatomy, I know where my liver is, but otherwise I couldn't tell you. But if you find, especially that there's an area where there's a lot of tension, and it helps to figure out, okay, well, exactly what muscles do I have there? Because sometimes you realize that what you thought was a bone, and you accepted the fact that it was stiff, is actually muscle. And you realize, oh, I can actually relax that. That's good to know. Yes?
Every day after preschool, my daughter has a little fit getting out of the car. She just has a challenge at the same challenge, the same time every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just having a hard time finding a way in or a way through. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about preparing for those challenges that come up every day that we don't have a lot of control over.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is called preventing unskillful qualities from arising. It comes. No. Yeah. It's the part of the practice that tends to get underrated, i.e., at the end of a meditation, ask yourself, okay, what are my challenges going to be today? And can I think of something that might work? And do this before you leave meditation. And how old is the daughter?
She's 4.
She's 4. Well, you have to ask, okay, what is it precisely about that time of day? You know, what is your concern? Is it some of the kid at school? Is it, you know, what is it? Try to ask her. And before she gets into the fit, ask her, okay, notice the next time you get into a fit, you know, what was it that sparked the fit? And tell mommy about it, you know. Because sometimes they don't feel, you know, that they can talk to you about it. Just make them know that, yeah, they can talk. But the idea that they can sense, if they can sense it coming on, you make them more responsible. So it's not you trying to solve their problem and say, hey, look, you know, when you come out of the car and you lose your temper, this is not good for you. It makes you, you're miserable about this, and mommy wants to know, okay, what are you thinking about that brings this on? Try to be a little bit more conscious and see what she comes up with. One of my teacher's students had a daughter who had epileptic fits, and she'd actually done a lot of damage to herself because she would just fall down on her face, fall down on her head, without warning. And as we were talking to her, and John one time said, "Well, how do you feel before it comes on?" And she said, "Well, I've never noticed." He said, "Well, try to notice." And she realized that she could sense it was coming on, and so she stopped having to fall down on her head. You know, she would sit down. So try to get her to be a little bit more aware of what's going on.
When you speak of these fabrications, I find there are times in my life where I can tell what I'm doing. You know, someone will say something to me, and I think to myself, wow, I'm reacting this way because of A, B, and C. And I recognize that. And at the same time, I feel lousy. I feel upset, or I feel there's something emotional hanging on. I wonder about the discordance between being logically aware of what you're bringing to the situation, how you're holding something, and the reality of what's really sticking around, the emotion.
Okay, your hands are showing where the problem is. It's in your breath. It's the way you're breathing around it. One. And then there's layers of dialogue. And there's the dialogue says, okay, rationally you should not be thinking this, but this part of you says, I'd like to hold on. Okay, ask, okay, what would you feel deprived of if you didn't hold on? Because some of us feel that our emotions are only the real me, and if I don't hold on to my emotion, I'm going to lose my identity. And you have to say, okay, well, let's just breathe through that for a bit and see if that's true. Don't argue with it directly, just put a question mark. And say, and because we talk about the felt reality of the emotion, you're feeling it in the body, you're feeling it because of the way you breathe. And so say, okay, can I breathe a little bit more calmly? And whatever voice comes up in the mind says, I don't want to do that. That's the voice you want to look for. And then you get to the next layer of conversation. Let's put it that way. Yes?
I got a question about jhana practice. When I first started reading about jhana practice, it seemed like a lot of the literature out there would really oversimplify it, like you just breathe, and they use words like passively. And I know for me, like in practicing, I feel like there's this balancing act where I can't exclusively just focus on the breath. I've got to kind of sense the mental qualities and things that are going into it, because there is this tension, as you mentioned, and so like being aware of that. I'm wondering, is that the correct way? Because I feel like, should I just be focusing on the breath and forcing everything else out? Or?
No, in the first jhana, one of the factors is direct thought and evaluation. And the whole purpose of the evaluation is to get the mind, if you think of the mind and the breath as two things that you're trying to put together. You ask, okay, what is there about the breath that the mind doesn't like? What is there about the mind that's not willing to settle down? Okay, I've got to deal with that. You kind of But one image I used one time in Thailand, it was a total disaster because of Thai cultural things. It's like a dog lying down. You know, the dog lies down, but first has to scratch here, scratch there, scratch here, scratch there to make it more comfortable. It lies down, oops, there's a stone. It gets up, it scratches the stone away, and then it lies down again. And so there's the same, to what extent is the breath uncomfortable? You've got to work with that. And also, what attitudes are you bringing in right now that are preventing you from settling down? And you've got to think your way into being willing to settle down too. And that's what all the evaluation is about. And then finally, once you've got a snug fit, okay, then you can just kind of go right for it without having to do all this thinking. But the thinking, there's one interpretation that the thinking is just kind of this unfortunate wobbliness in the mind that you have to get past. It's actually doing the work to get you settled down. It's an important part of getting things together. Is everybody satisfied? Okay.
You had mentioned preference.
Mm-hmm.
And if my preference is, I'm just wondering if this is too simplistic, but is, to always to aim to act skillfully.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so that when I don't, I recognize that, that inwardly, okay, I see I didn't act skillfully. And I can go back and make the effort of kind of flagging my reaction and why it came up, so that I'll notice it as it starts to come up the next time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering if my preference is that I always act skillfully, knowing I won't always act skillfully. Is that just too simplistic? Or?
No, I mean that's the practice. You've got to have preferences. And it's just that hopefully as the practice evolves, your sense of what is skillful will evolve as well. And your ability to recognize it will get quicker. And you'll learn how to deal with it with more maturity. It's an evolving process. But
So that's what I've been practicing with since I was at Wat Metta
mm-hmm.
last, that was March, October, I can't remember. Anyway, a while back. And so here's my next question. So I believe that I am identifying my anger or my annoyance or my greed a little bit sooner. And the reason I think that is because I'm less, there appears to be less emotional reaction coming up, but I'm not sure if that's an actual result of seeing it firsthand. I'm not as drawn to, there's not this as strong of an emotional tang,
Mm-hmm.
say. But I'm not sure if that's just...
Well, notice how the Buddha taught Rahula. He didn't say, if you do something unskillful, you're a bad boy. He says, okay, if you do something unskillful, this is what you do. And once you have that permission that you admit that it's unskillful, then it takes a lot of the sting away. Because the sting comes and, that was horrible, I don't want to admit that to myself, I'm going to hide it. That's the sting.
What about the draw? There seems to be less draw as well. So as there's less sting, there's less of an emotional hit from the sting, which actually, I think I can see, I was at one time thought that was kind of delicious, that sting itself. Like, oh, I'm alive.
Yeah. Alive, making a mess of things, yeah.
There's less draw as well, emotional draw, as it appears, as it begins to arise. Is that a natural?
Yeah, because you're beginning to see this is a process that I can step back from, step away from. and your identity is not bound up in that as much.
So it's identifying with that emotion that actually gives it the flavor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we'll be getting into this tomorrow, but the Buddha talks about how if you're trying to get past something that's unskillful, first you have to see when it's arising. Secondly, you have to see when it's passing away. And the arising is not just arising. He says you look for the origination, which means when it's arising, what else is arising at the same time? Like your daughter. When the fit comes on, what was her perception that got all upset? And then when it passes away, okay, what happened? Why did it pass away? And that's helpful for two things. One is that you see it's connected with something, and secondly you realize, okay, that doesn't have the solidity that you thought it had. Then the next step is to see, okay, what is the allure? Why do I like this? And this is an area where a lot of us tend to hide it. You know, we don't like our anger, but boy do we love it. You know? And you've got to learn how to see that with enough calmness to admit, oh yeah, I go for this because I thought I'm getting that out of it. Again, it's like seeing, you know, where are you feeding? And sometimes we don't want to be seen feeding certain things, you know, eating certain things. There was a Anagarika I heard about in, I think it was Chithurst, who was really on everybody's case. You know, the slightest little Vinaya infraction or imagined Vinaya infraction, he was on them. And then one day, one of the monks happened to go into the storeroom, and they found the Anagarika eating the chocolate. Like I was just he was just gorging himself on the chocolate. And he looked up at the monk. And he said, "I don't want you to be seeing me like this." And that's a lot of what the mind is like. You know, there's certain things that we feed on, and we don't want anybody to see us feeding on that. And we won't admit to ourselves that we're feeding on it. If you don't admit to yourself, you can't work with it. So this is another reason why we try to get the mind in a good solid state of concentration, so it feels more solid. You can see these things and not feel so threatened by them. Then you want to see the drawbacks. This is the fourth thing. What are the actual drawbacks of giving into this allure? And when you can see that the drawbacks are not worth, the pleasure you get out of it is not worth all the drawbacks, okay, that's when you develop dispassion, and the dispassion is the escape. So again, you've got to prefer the escape. So there's a preference there. And that means you have to give up your armor that you build around certain ways of feeding that you're hiding from yourself. Yes?
Fabrication, it's interesting that sometimes my moods will come up, and then my thoughts, I'll be in I'm not sure, maybe I'll be sad about something that happened, and then I'll start thinking of this particular bad experience. So that seems like that's interesting to me.
Sometimes it starts with one of those little subliminal perceptions that got you sad, and then you ask, why am I sad? And then you can think of all kinds of reasons. Right, yeah. Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that's interesting to me, when I'm driving, I'm watching myself as I'm driving, and sometimes, someone will make me mad, and I'm like, I'll get mad. And then, like today, I was going to flash my lights at somebody, and instead I turned on the windshield wiper. And then I laughed. It's like I get mad and I go laugh in seconds. And it's just it's so surprising and strange to me.
That's called fabricating and ignorance. It's called fabricating and ignorance.
But it just seems to be like
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and we do switch our moods pretty quickly like that.
like being more control.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so what you've got to look out for is, one is you get yourself into a bad breathing rhythm, and that can make you down. They did those experiments with people trying to recreate facial expressions, and simply creating the facial expression of sadness, they felt pretty miserable at the end of the day. So how are you holding your body? How are you breathing? And then be quick to notice, okay, when a little perception comes in, that sort of sets things off. Because sometimes it's it's the physical fabrication that can create the mental fabrication or produce certain mental fabrications. Sometimes it's the other way around. I mean, the influences go back and forth.
In my personal relationships with my family and friends, it's really, like, good communication is really important, and if there's a disagreement, kind of talking things out and sort of taking responsibility for our own stuff is really important. In a Dhamma context, I hear a lot of, like, take responsibility for yourself, sort of like become more independent of how others, treat you, whether, if they hurt your feelings or whatever. And so I'm wondering how much of that kind of talking things out is appropriate in a Dhamma context with, say, Dhamma friends, and how much is it just take it to the cushion and just kind of watch it?
It really depends on the individual. I mean, when the Buddha talks about your dealings with people who have wronged you, I mean, there are two contexts. One is forgiveness and the other is reconciliation. Talking out is the reconciliation part. In other words, you want to have a continued relationship. And so you have to sit down and talk about, okay, what went wrong? What values were ignored? And how can we get back on track so that we have the sense that we have common values together? Now, when you can do that, fine. But there'll be a lot of cases where you can't. Now, in your family, you want to be able to do that because that's, you've got a long-term commitment there. With members in the Dharma community, sometimes it's just somebody comes in, somebody goes out, and it's kind of, there's not that sense of commitment together. And if you find that this person is not willing to talk about it, well, that's when you have to sit down in the cushion and say, okay, I forgive the person. And forgiveness here doesn't mean that you have to love them. It's simply that, you're not going to get back at them. And so it's a combination. You have to look when reconciliation is possible and desirable, you go for that. And when it's not, then you have to sit with it. Yes?
Can you tell me how I should think about Dhamma? Is anger ever useful and a tool to motivate for change, or do you see it as always negative?
Exciting anger, you have to be really careful with that. There must be other ways to get change. If you're really angry, then you're not thinking straight. I mean, you can see that there's something wrong, and you figure, okay, what's the best way to get people also to see that this is wrong, so that we can actually act and get a skillful solution. In his case, I'd say, may he understand the causes for true happiness and act on them, and that's basically what goodwill is about. And if if there's really something, and there are a lot of things wrong with our society that need to be changed, what's the most effective way of doing that? In a way that we can get as many people on board as possible. That's how I would think. Again, if you can look at social action and political action in the context of generosity, it puts a very different cast on it. What would be the most generous way of dealing with a situation so that actually would cause a change for the better? Okay. Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying thank you.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing some of you at least tomorrow. So, good night.
So, Ajahn, we'd like to close out and let you leave, and then we'll have a few announcements.
Okay.
Explain the weekend and other opportunities.
Okay. Who did the table?
Should we pay respect to
Who did the table?
Alistair, that we did the table. For the shrine.
Nice job.